first up this evening is Alejandro Henao. Alejandro is a postdoctoral researcher with the National Renewable Energy Labs, NREL. He recently graduated with his PhD from the University of Colorado, Denver. And as part of his dissertation, to really find out what all this technology, how it works, and get the answers that he was looking for in his research, he actually went in as a driver for both Lyft and Uber. So Alejandro has this experience. He's going to be talking about the future being here. And I welcome him to the stage right now, Alejandro Henao.
Thank you. I'm actually super excited. Boulder is the place where I did my undergrad, and I still play soccer on Sundays at Pleasant View. So I come here a lot, and thank you for the invitation for the city. So I am doing a postdoc with the National Renewable Energy Laboratories. I work in transportation, looking at Uber, Lyft, but also autonomous vehicles and how we can help cities to think about moving forward. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Cali, Colombia, in South America. Let's say I grew up in a place sharing a car with 5 people, so my parents and brother and sister. So I consider myself a multimodal person, so I have to get around by bus, bike, walk, and so on. One of the things that I also did was taking some taxis around, and I was so intrigued even since I was a child on looking at these yellow things, how they work and how they park around and how they go around with just one driver creating some congestion. I'm just putting it out there. So I moved to Colorado, up in the mountains. I took a semester off from school, in the teenage years. I thought I was going to travel the world, and I ended up with a job at Keystone, Colorado. So one thing I realized was to get around, you pretty much need a car for the most part. So really experiencing that dependency. And I want to quote these, it's derived from Enrique Peñalosa, where he talks about a rich city is not a city where people own a car. A rich city is a people where you don't have to own a car. So it's just a choice that is provided to you. So I want to look at that. So nowadays we're talking about advanced mobility, disruption, transportation. There's so many companies out there, and they keep emerging, blending, going away, and so on. So here we are in Boulder. I just took this picture after I got off the bus and walked around Pearl Street. So we're talking about different modes. Boulder is a good place to get around through my experience with my undergrad, and even nowadays. And then we have this technology, Uber, Lyft. Let's just start thinking about that, because that's where I did my research. But how they're getting impacted is that there is a huge uptake into looking at these graphs from, let's say, after Uber started, the first 1 billion rides, they did it in 6 years. The second billion, it was in 6 months, and so on. So let me talk about ride hailing. I don't like the term ride sharing unless we're talking about Uber Pool or Lyft line, and I can explain that later. But let me tell you a little bit about my grad school story. So I finished my undergrad, I did some structural engineering work, and commuting to work is where there's some problems with transportation. So I went back to school, and thinking about the way of what I wanted to do for my PhD, I was so intrigued by Uber and Lyft, and they were just in the initial stages. So looking at some cities, how they were thinking about, and the first thing is to get a PhD, you need some data. So it was really hard to get some data. Even today, after so many years, it's still hard to get data from Uber and Lyft. They might have some reasons why, privacy issues, business issues, and so on, but again, so in order to do that, so I became a driver, just to understand the origin and destinations, understanding what passengers are using, what is the marketplace, and so on. And I'm not going to talk about the research itself because it's so boring, or whatever, but I will talk about the big points and how we look at this going forward. So thinking back about the taxis, and this is a term that is used in the taxi industry, is deadheading. So when you see a driver going around without passenger, that means deadheading. And that happens with Uber and Lyft as well. So this is a story from an NFL player that took an Uber ride from Chicago to Buffalo, 540 miles because he missed his airplane. That's great. It made the news. Everybody was talking about it, exciting the conversation between the driver and the passenger. The first thing I was thinking about is the ride back for that driver from Buffalo to Chicago. I don't know, but that's zero ripple that you're moving in there. So that's what I'm talking when I talk about deadheading. There's some equity issues, both in the driver's side and the passenger side. So those are some of the other things I wanted to look at. In terms of parking, there's high potential for parking reduction because people are using these services instead of driving around. And then because people claim and say that parking is one of the difficult reasons to get around, so they use other services. So cities can be using these opportunities to reduce parking, to have a better uses for that land. And even some developers are thinking about it. They might have to provide by code some parking, but they have to think about how do we accommodate these once we don't need that parking space. And then the other thing I wanted to look at is travel behavior. So we talk about the end of the car ownership. People are not gonna own the cars anymore. They're not gonna need it anymore, which might be true. And actually I'm working on a project right now around that. But also there's the option that people are, let's say, commuting by transit or biking or walking, and they stop doing that to use Uber and Lyft. So there is a set of options that is going to happen, and that's part of what I did in the research. Now, making an analogy with autonomous vehicles, we talk about deadheading, parking, travel behavior. When you have the autonomous vehicles, we have the Z of V. So in the transportation world, we talk about single occupancy vehicle with an S. Now we're going to be talking about zero occupancy vehicle. So if you think about the efficiency of, let's say, Uber and Lyft right now, I'm just going to throw some numbers out there. Instead of being 1.0, which is single occupancy vehicle, when you take into account the deadheading, it's 0.8. So what direction do we want to go? So we want to increase that vehicle occupancy, or we want to increase that efficiency, reduce that deadheading. And those are the kind of things that we have to think about when Uber and Lyft is coming, when the autonomous vehicles are coming, and how do we get there? And these companies also want to increase that. They want to be in the benefit side. So one of the things I think about is we don't have to wait until the autonomous vehicles are in here. We're going to start understanding those impacts. And it depends on what city is important for you. What you care about: congestion, energy, greenhouse gas emission, mobility and equity, safety. And I know Boulder has a lot of these in the radar. So based on what the city is doing, we can look into it. So one of the things I want to point out is let's measure passengers instead of vehicles. So one thing is there's so many cars on the road, but it's not so much, it's more important to look at how many people we're moving. So one thing in the engineering world, we talk about VMT, vehicles miles traveled. I'm trying to introduce this term about passenger miles traveled, how we look at this as an efficient way of moving people around. And let me provide this picture. It's a clear picture on how much space you need to move 60 people. So if all of them are going by bicycle, this is the space, by bus, and by car. Okay. Now, and these are not my slides, I'm just, it's out there. So now we compare it to car, Uber and Lyft, and then autonomous vehicles. And do you see any difference? Which I think is wrong, because some of these on the right actually will have only a driver, or some of these in the right will only have zero occupancy vehicle. We'll just be going cars around. So there will be actually less people in this picture. So that's something that the city of Boulder should be thinking about. What are the policies that you need to increase that or to change those kind of things? So there is opportunities and risks. So could be more or less congestion, moving more or less people around. There could be more occupancy vehicle, and then there is the travel behavior question. So for my specific research, I have some answers to these questions. So there is more research coming around, which we really need to understand. And it's not just about understanding that, but also looking forward where we want to be as a city, as individuals, as companies, and that's the really important thing. And I want to close with this slide. And do I have time? 1 minute, perfect. So I want to, I go about Uber and Lyft are not sharing the data. Share the data. Let's do the research. My thing here is we can do some collaboration work here. We can look at what are the common and shared goals that we have as a business entity, as a city, as individuals, as researchers, as academia. we can look towards those benefits. We can do some pilot programs where we do the analysis. And being in NREL, we talk a lot about providing high mobility and low energy. So let's say we can think about starting with the vehicle fleet. So what are the vehicle fleets that these companies are using nowadays compared to what is the general population use? And then what are the policies that they're saying for the future? They're going to say X amount is electrification. And that could be reducing the electrification, the energy use. So there's common goals where the city will be interested in knowing what is it right now, what is it going to be in the future if we can provide some electricity to it. Reduce deadheading instead of going around looking for passengers. It's better than taxis, but it's still no better than not having anybody in your car. And then increase the sharing. We talk about the Lyft line and Uber pool and putting more people on those seats, which is one of the Lyft and Uber dilemma. And then travel behavior. We can do studies about how is this changing, and we're starting to see some more. So with that, and all of these will give us, if you have the data, if you do the research, if you look at the impacts, then we can just drive some policies either on based on efficiency and mileage, or depending on how many people are in the cars and so on. And I'm just looking for this discussion because the experts here have a lot more to say, and this is where we can help, let's say, the city of Boulder and everybody get to where those goals you want to be. So with that,
So folks, next up we have Dave Britton. Dave is the general manager for Uber, but not only in the state of Colorado, the state of Kansas, and Utah too, right Dave? And Missouri and Oklahoma, so that's a lot of Ubers. What you do with all those Ubers, Dave's about to tell us.
Thank you very much. So as Andrea mentioned, I'm Dave Britton. I'm the general manager for Uber here in Colorado, as well as a nice strip of states across the U.S. And similar to Alejandro's comment, it's an honor for me to be here. I'm actually a Fairview High School grad from class of '98. Here we go. So, and similar to John as well. So we go way back. You'll meet him next. And so, I've been with the company for almost a year and a half now. And one of the things that's been so exciting about the role for me is how quickly things change. Like a lot of the things that Alejandro is referencing are things that we've already made progress on as the tech continues to get better. And so we'll get into that a little bit. One of the things I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time talking about our business in Colorado, just to provide some context, and then I'll turn to the future. So we've been operating in Colorado since 2012. Colorado was actually one of the earlier markets for Uber. At that point, it was Uber Black, which is the commercial, or sort of like the limo offering. The state bill was passed in 2014 that made transportation network companies or the peer-to-peer option fully recognized. And from that, we now have UberX, Uber XL, which is a larger car with more seats. We have Uber Select, which is a little bit of a nicer experience. We still have Uber Black and Uber SUV. Those are available throughout the state of Colorado, pretty much anywhere that you can get cell reception, and that's an important component of the whole concept that you have to keep in mind, is that you still need the other underpinning technologies to work so you can get connected to the driver. And then in Denver and Boulder, we have Uber Pool. So as Alejandro mentioned, that is a true shared ride, and I'll get into that a little bit more as we get into it. We also do seasonal products, so be on the lookout for Uber Ski, where you can get a car with a ski rack. Occasionally we'll do Uber Pedal if you want a bike rack. So we try to look at that multiple ways. The other thing also, just to make sure people understand, is I'm not based in San Francisco. I'm actually based down in Denver. We have a team that looks after those 5 states that I mentioned, that sits down in the industry building in the Rhino neighborhood. We have a 10,000 square foot facility out in the Montbello neighborhood that's focused on partner support. They can go there to get help after they've started driving. They also, the process for becoming a driver is pretty complicated and requires medical exams and vehicle inspections. And so having a one-stop shop where somebody can go and get through that process with a lot of hand-holding is really useful for everybody involved. And then finally, we actually have a mapping office, an engineering office out in Louisville. You might remember the big maps that was just stuck around on Pearl Street. That became a part of Uber some time ago, and is now in Louisville because it's growing pretty rapidly. So, a little bit more about what we're focused on now. I think so much of what our company has been focused on recently is the driver experience. I think in a lot of discussions that we have like this, we appropriately focus on the rider impact. But it's important to not lose sight of the driver. So we've been making changes. We recently added tipping in the application, which was clearly something that drivers have been looking for. We've also added features to help address other problems that you face. So we have what we call driver destinations, which allows a driver to say, I want to go here and I need to be there by this time. Please only match me with rides that get me that direction. So the deadheading problem is something that we recognize, and at the end of the day, one, it makes sure that you hopefully are full as you get closer to home, but it also makes sure that you know that you won't get a ride that takes you to Fort Collins or something like that as you're trying to get home at the end of the night. We also have long trip notifications now, which gives the driver an indication of, hey, this is going to be a long trip. If you don't have enough fuel, if you're, for whatever reason you need to not be in the car for 45 minutes or so, you should go ahead and pass on this one. So we're continuing to make updates like that, and I think it's really improving the experience and making it a lot better. But really, I know the reason we're all here is to talk about the future. And so these statistics, I think, are mind-boggling. So there's about 1.2 billion cars in the world. I'm sure that if I remember from when I was working up on Pearl Street, it feels like most of them are going into Boulder in the morning and then out in the evening. But I think the other big thing that can't get lost in the conversation is that they sit idle 95% of the time. So you're seeing that we have these items that are expensive that then sit. And if you think about also the impact on how we use our land, and the fact that I've heard a statistic that it's around 8 parking spots per car. That's a lot of real estate that we dedicate to storing these things where they sit most of the time. So much of the opportunity going forward is going to be solving these problems. And so for us, it started with the founders of the company just thought it would be cool if you could push a button on your phone and a car would show up. And it was nothing more complicated than that, but I think they quickly realized that it was much more impactful. And you can see, really the goal is a safe, reliable, cost-effective ride. And that's really what we look at in terms of are we being successful or not. The thing that I think is interesting is you start to get into a lot of behavior change. So I studied engineering undergrad and was too interested in how people think and how they change, and went back and studied marketing in grad school. And the science of behavior change, I think, is just fascinating. And when you look at what this system has been able to do, it's really, really helped, I think, start to create new possibilities in how we think about transit in the way that the world's going to move. So if you look at our ridership, 10% of millennial riders have either given up their car or never got one, based on the fact that systems like ours, and it's not just systems like ours, I think it's so important that a part of what it is a system like ours enables them to just become fully multimodal. They can think about transit, they can think about walking, they can think about bike share, they can think about us, should it be the case. And so they're able to go to a full, go all the way to removing a car from their life. I think that it's more interesting to talk about the person who used to drive themselves everywhere and is now, through this process, hopefully going back and reconsidering transit, looking at our system, looking at other ways of getting around, and is no longer always defaulting to the place of saying, the first thing I do, I'm going to go get in my car. And if we can continue to get people out of that behavior, it will only continue to bode well as we go forward. And so one of the things that we talked a little bit about is ride sharing. So this is Uber Pool. Basically, you're looking at a set of riders, origin and destination, and because of the technology that enables the system, you're looking at a case where you can start to match people that are going the same direction. And so in the spirit of trying to make sure that the cars are as full as possible, you find yourself in a scenario where you have multiple riders sharing. It allows them to save a little bit of money. The driver can theoretically benefit because they can, I've heard stories of them having just an hour on trip because there's somebody new getting in the car before the next person gets out. And most importantly, I think you find that, you're taking a car off the road. You used to have 2 cars to do that trip. Now you have 1. That's another behavior change, though. A slide that I saw some time ago that I thought was great was I think it was something like 15 years ago. It said, never talk to anybody you meet on the internet, never get in a car with a stranger. And now it's call a car from the internet to get in a car with a stranger. And now this is getting in a car with somebody else who's also going the same direction as you. And so I think you're seeing people start to accept and start to embrace different ways of getting around. And then you get to the autonomous component. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, I assume will focus on autonomy. Shared autonomy is clearly where we need to be in the future. If everybody has their own autonomous vehicle and it just goes and drives around when we're done, the zero occupant vehicle problem becomes very real. We have our own autonomous program that we're running. We have cars in Pittsburgh and in Tempe, Arizona that are currently giving rides to riders. There is a safety operator in the front and typically another engineer to help with if they need to intervene. The technology is not perfect yet, but I think if you look at how fast it's been progressing, it just keeps getting closer and closer and closer. And so for us, it's really important to be a part of help, continuing to build the data sets that allow us to feel confident in the safety of the technology. If you look at the number of accidents that have human error, it's somewhere around 95%. So even if we end up in a world where everybody owns their own, we might be in a much safer place, but really we have to make sure that we get to a place where we're sharing it. And that should allow us, I believe that the statistic is, the estimate is somewhere around a 80 to 90% reduction in the number of cars required to be able to move people. So if you think about that, that's a staggering change if suddenly 80% of cars are moved. And so finally, I think the final component is to talk about electric vehicles. And ideally we get to a place where we have EVs as a major part of it as well. For us, as we look at electric vehicles, there's a lot of our system and the way that our system works that we believe helps create sort of a market push towards EVs. Obviously, there's incentives that you can have, but if a part of your job is looking at operating costs that you have for running a vehicle, that's a really good incentive to move over. But we also want to make sure that the promise of EV doesn't necessarily make us lose sight of the realities of where we're at right now in terms of, particularly as it pertains to our business. One, range anxiety, if you're by yourself, is one thing. If somebody paid you to take you somewhere and you've got range anxiety, that's not a good thing. Fortunately, we know the batteries are getting better, the cars are getting better. Charging infrastructure, has to be there to support this. So if you're in a place where, if you decide to drive with us, which, as I said, we spend a lot of time thinking about the drivers. My favorite part of my job is talking to the retiree who decided that they were stir crazy at home and wanted to get out and drive, or the person who unfortunately finds themselves in job transition and now is driving to help bridge the gap, or the PhD who's doing fantastic, doing some research to understand things, or the entrepreneur who's saying, this is my side thing, I do this to make money while I'm building my dream. All of those people are thinking about it very economically, and so if they can fill up their car in 2 minutes and it takes them forever to charge their car, that's an opportunity cost that has to at least factor in the way that we discuss it. All in all, we do believe that the future is going to be a shared autonomous electric future, and we are really excited to be a part of events like this and be a part of the dialogue to make sure that we can make it happen going forward. So look forward to this discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dave. As you can see on the screen, next up we hear from the other company providing all these kinds of rides, and that's Lyft. Tonight we're fortunate to have John Walker here. John manages Lyft's transportation policy team, and he works with our state, local governments to really work through the issues that affect transportation and the environment, and what's Lyft's role in helping to arrive to certain solutions that they can work towards. So with that being said, John Walker.
So bear with me, it's conference season and I picked up something in Detroit or Chicago or San Francisco last week, so I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I'll try to speak up. So as Dave mentioned, I am also a Colorado native, Fairview High School, Eisenhower Elementary, Burbank, back when it was Burbank. Also I spent about 5 years at Rocky Mountain Institute here in Boulder, so I know a lot of you folks from then. I got to talk at Science Tuesday on one night with the City Council, so really happy to be back here. I'm based in Colorado, spent a lot of time in the air, spent a lot of time in the other great cities in this country. So I want to talk about the future of transportation, and we are extremely optimistic about it. I know there are these heaven and hell thoughts out there, but I want to talk about the scenario we see as the most likely, and I want to talk about some levers we can pull to stack the deck. Right? We want to stack the deck to make sure we get to that bright future. So really quickly, I want to go over our climate impact goals. So in the wake of the federal government ceding its position on helping the environment, cities, states, and the private industry stepped up, and we put out some very ambitious environmental goals. So we've committed that every one of our electric autonomous vehicles, starting with our vehicles that are operating in Boston, will be powered by renewable energy. 2, we're going to give 1 billion rides in electric autonomous vehicles by 2025. And 3, we're going to cut U.S. emissions by about 5 million tons per year at least by 2025. So a significant number. If every Fortune 500 company did that, we would have 0 emissions from the transportation sector. So very ambitious goals. I just want to go through those quickly. I thought that might be relevant for this crowd. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through this. We all know our transportation system is broken. It might not seem like it sometimes when you're watching a car commercial and they're blasting down the road and with no traffic and convertible, but that's not reality. This is reality. The reality is 36 in Boulder. The reality is I-90 in Chicago, where it took me 2 hours to get to the airport. In a lift line, I would point out. So at least there were 4 people. And so it's broken. And really it's because our transportation system is a 20th century system. And really we gave people 2 options. One, you take fixed route macro transit, which is fantastic if you're near hubs. It's got a fixed schedule and high capacity. It has some issues though, like first last mile, slow off peak. And then there's car ownership. So then you just buy a car, and the car is the all-you-can-eat pizza thing, right? You buy the car, you save 30 grand into it, and now you have a 10-cent marginal operating cost to drive it. So you drive the heck out of it. It's your one thing. You already spent 30K, you might as well drive it. But you have your choice of route, your choice of time. It's just you. It's always at the ready, and it's usually the fastest. So what did consumers choose over the last 100 years? They've chosen to drive by themselves overwhelmingly, and that's even true in Boulder. You know, we have a really great community with public transit, with bike paths, and yet the majority of people drive by themselves. 86% of people drive a private vehicle, and only 5% of people in this country are taking it. So we've proven another way. So us, along with a lot of the other folks in the space, have proven there's another way. There's a 20%. So Lyft actually covers almost everyone in the country. 300 cities, 95% of Americans. If you're anywhere that's, like Dave said, if you've got cell coverage, you can probably get them. But we are still, this is tip of the iceberg. We're only, our founder likes to say we're only 1% of the way there. That middle bar in the middle, that's private car ownership. That's $1 trillion a year in the US alone revenue. We, along with the taxis and Uber, that's us. Okay, so we're tiny. We're tip of the iceberg. The gorilla is personal car ownership, and I don't like when that gets lost in the weeds. We want to think about how do we control it, how do we do things with rideshare. Let's not forget about that bar in the middle. That's the gorilla. So this is from a study that I worked on along with my colleague Charlie Johnson, who's now at Pima, when I was at Rocky Mountain Institute. We projected personal car ownership is going to plummet, and then Lyft co-founder said by 2025 you won't own a car in a major city. So how are we going to do that? We're 1% now. we've been around for a while, how are we going to get to 95? And it's simple. We can, right now, we are not cost competitive with owning a car. You can own and operate a car for between 50 cents and $1 per mile in this country, and we are around the $2 plus range. So we simply cannot compete on that economic level with full use of cars. But the interesting thing is when we go to automation, that flips. And all of a sudden, an automated lift vehicle can cost about the same as owning and operating a car. So finally, what we have is an alternative. An alternative means somebody can choose to take robo-taxis everywhere for the same cost as owning and operating a car. That's going to cause a lot of folks to switch. This is on the right here. I'll walk you through this quickly. We've got some technical folks in the room. But what this is saying, this is from the University of Texas Austin study. What this is saying is when we get to $1 a mile, demand for automated taxis in this country is at least 25 billion rides. And that's a tipping point. So what that means is when we get our costs down, all of a sudden there's huge demand for our service. We're between $2 and $3 a mile right now, and so the demand is about 1. Well, how are we going to do this? What's the road ahead for life? So we're thinking about these subscription plans, right? So in the future, when we have these automated vehicles, you can choose to own and buy and insure and maintain and register and park a fuel vehicle, or you get a Lyft subscription for, let's just say, $300 a month. That takes care of your needs. It'll be like a cell phone plan, right? 500 miles a month. Things like that. We also compare it with other modes, and so I apologize to Lauren. I would have put the easy mile in here, but we're going to have smaller vehicles for point to point and for less dense areas. We need dynamic shuttles. Dynamic shuttles are going to be important. Public transit, we are never going to replace public transit. We don't want to. Buses make a ton of sense on trunk routes. Trains make a ton of sense. What we need is a spectrum of these types of vehicles that work together. So we're very interested in active partnerships with transit agencies. So here's how we see it going. Now, I'll point something out. It's actually kind of funny. I was on a panel with Lauren, who will speak after me, in Chicago 2 years ago. And somebody asked her, they said, well, when are we going to see this in 2025, 2030? And Lauren said, oh, I think in 2017 you'll see automated trucks on the road. And I swear the crowd gasped. And did anyone see the automated beer truck in Colorado? So she was right. We had that in Colorado, autonomous beer truck on the road. And so this stuff is happening fast. It's not 15, 20 years. It's 2, 3 years. Dave mentioned air pilots. If you're in Boston and you order a Lyft in the coming weeks, you might get picked up by an electric automated vehicle. So that's where we are. We're there. We're heading to the ability of these vehicles to take people on productive rides. And we're going to have a period of transition where we have human drivers and robot drivers, and eventually it's just going to be these automated vehicles. And so what can cities and states do today? There's a lot they can do. So we want to work with public transit. We've been in talks with RTD. We work with some of the biggest public transit agencies in the country. We're going to with Boston, with MBTA. And we can learn from pilots that have been done before. We can iterate on that. So that's what we'd love to do in Colorado. Increasing pooling. So I totally agree. Without pooling, there's a problem. But I do want to point one thing out, and I can help Alejandro fix his slide, but we don't really care about the static vehicles. We care about passenger throughput. And so automated vehicles actually have a much higher throughput. So what we need is a slide that shows the throughput of vehicles, not just static vehicles. And I'd love to make that slide. Maybe we can talk about that. So we need to pool the vehicles. We need to increase that. So people are surprised by this, but we're interested in congestion pricing. So we will support that. Autonomous vehicle development. So we need to be able to test these vehicles in a safe manner. And one of the things that's super interesting that I know RMI and the city are thinking about is how do we simulate AV introduction now by subsidizing rides? We're very interested in that idea. Very, very cool. And then electric vehicle proliferation. So let's stack the deck. These things, electric vehicles make sense for us economically. But let's stack the deck and let's incentivize these vehicles to be electric. It's very challenging for us now to put electric vehicles on the platform because folks are just bringing the car they own to drive. And the demographic of people who own electric vehicles is not the demographic of people who drive, unfortunately. So we need to start incentivizing the vehicles, and when we get into a fleet mode, that'll be much easier. So imagine if a city or the state or the feds gave incentives to Uber to put electric vehicles into our fleet. We're already doing it with Chevy. So in California, you can check out a Chevy Bolt, and you can drive it with Lyft. And if you do enough enough rides, the vehicle's free, the fuel's free, the insurance is free, the maintenance is free, and all you make is money. And so a very popular program, as you might imagine, we have a waiting list for it. And then we fair electricity rates, so that's something that's interesting. We need that as well. And then I'm going to get the hook here. So better land use policy. We need to end parking minimums, and let's have curb space for not just personal vehicles. Let's have curb space for people. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
So not only are we learning a lot of information about what these ride services can do, but I think we're seeing that Fairview High School must be teaching some really incredible classes to their students. Whatever high school that Lauren went to, I'm sure that's a good high school as well. So next up is Lauren Isaacs. And Lauren is the Director of Business Initiatives for the North American operation of Easy Mile. Easy Mile's national headquarters is right here in Colorado. It's down at Denver at the Panasonic Smart City project. She'll be talking about what they're doing there. And for those of you that don't know, Easy Mile provides electric driverless shuttles that are designed to cover short distances within multi-use urban environments and places like Boulder. So, Lauren.
For having me. So very happy to be here. I don't have the high school connection. I just moved to Denver 6 months ago. So a little less of a connection. But for Easy Mile, it's huge that we're here. We chose Denver. We have a lot of options around the country. So we're really, really excited to be here and very happy to be here in Boulder. So I just want to start with one of my favorite slides. I might have even had this back 2 years ago because I love this slide. I hope if you leave nothing else, you are convinced that driverless cars are closer than they are up here. This is actually from November 2015. This is old news, okay? And hopefully you'll be convinced of that by the end of this. So what I'm going to talk about really quickly is what our future could look like, kind of a Jetsons future, put your thinking caps on. I'll tell you about Easy Mile and our Easy 10, and this is our adorable Easy 10 driverless electric shuttle, and I'll tell you more about that. And then what governments like Boulder can be doing today. So our driverless future. So what I'd like to do is walk you through 2 scenarios of what our world could look like. So imagine 50 years from now, imagine we have all driverless vehicles. So imagine it's a Monday morning, I wake up, get my kids ready for school, and I get them in, I summon our private driverless vehicle to come and pick them up and bring them to school. So it comes from about 15 miles away in this remote parking lot. It picks up my kids and it brings them to their school. And by the time I'm finished getting ready, the car comes back and it goes to take me downtown, to take me to work. So I get into my car, and this is actually my favorite time of the day. The first thing I do is get on the elliptical trainer and I get my workout in. Then I realize I should probably start working, so I make a pot of coffee. This is all in my driverless vehicle while I'm commuting. I sit back and enjoy my coffee and I start working. And then eventually I get to my office. It takes a while because there's a pretty decent amount of traffic on the road, but it really doesn't bother me because I had such a nice commute. So then I get into the office and I realize I don't have any groceries available for dinner that night. So using my smartphone, I program my vehicle to first go to one grocery store where I can get the cheapest produce, the second grocery store where I can get the cheapest meat, and then the third grocery store where I can get the cheapest toilet paper. So my vehicle runs all these errands for me, and then it goes out to that remote parking lot 15 miles away, very cheap parking lot there, and it waits for its next assignment. So that's scenario number 1. And I call that the nightmare scenario. But I will tell you, when I share this scenario with people, they actually get really excited. They're like, this is what I've been waiting for. This is my dream come true. This is like a personal chauffeur that does everything for me. And if you think about it, that's what human nature does, right? Like, we are pretty selfish, and we're going to take advantage of this technology. So from a transportation planning perspective, it's frightening. We're putting easily 5-10 times the amount of VMT on the road. It may be a safer society, but it's actually could be way worse with the congestion. So let me play out for you the same scenario, the second one. So imagine I wake up on a Monday morning, get my kids ready for school, and I get them onto their driverless school bus. And then once they go, I get myself ready. When I'm ready to go to work, I use my smartphone, I summon my local Easy 10 to come pick me up and bring me to the local train station. The Easy 10 picks up a couple of my neighbors along the way, and it takes me to the train station where it is perfectly timed. I can get right onto the train, and it takes me downtown. So I have a lovely commute in. Then when I get there, I can either get on a bike share bike, or maybe it's raining, I'll get on another Easy 10, and it takes me that last mile to my office. So then, similarly, I realized I don't have groceries available for dinner that night, so I use my smartphone, and I schedule delivery of groceries for that evening once I'm home. So this is the second scenario. I call it the utopian scenario. You can tell the big difference is the level of ride sharing that happens. So I want to really quickly compare between these two scenarios what that looks like. For both of them, you have increased safety because driverless vehicles inherently eliminate the human driver, so they're going to be way, way safer. From a vehicle miles traveled perspective, as you can imagine, the nightmare scenario is terrible. Greenhouse gas emissions, I put question marks there because driverless vehicles do not necessarily equate to electric. That's really important from a government perspective to be aware. You can't guarantee one or the other. Urban sprawl, there is the potential that people are going to be willing to live much farther from where they work just because their value of time has now changed with their time in the vehicle. Parking requirements, in theory, there would be no change in the nightmare scenario because people will continue to own cars the way that they do today. The only difference in that nightmare scenario is that people might relocate where all the parking is. So you might see in a downtown like Boulder, your parking requirements could go way down in either of these scenarios, but you still need that level of parking elsewhere. It just is going to be moved somewhere else in the nightmare scenario. Low-income mobility, which I think is very important from a government perspective, is what will happen with public transit. So in that nightmare scenario, you notice there was no mention of public transit, and it is frightening to think that it could actually completely go away. Whereas in the utopian scenario, public transit is actually absolutely necessary, and it becomes a requirement in terms of having robust, good multimodal options. You can tell I have a lot of similar themes going for the prior presenters. So this gets me to the easy mile vision. So the idea is that if we can introduce the driverless technology in a way that is shared and electric, you can actually start to reclaim our cities. And this is actually a big reason why I joined Easy Mile. So let me tell you a little bit about the company. So unlike Uber and Lyft, you may not have heard of us. We're a 3-year-old company. We're based in southern France. As I mentioned, our North America headquarters are here in Denver, which we're really excited about. We are a driverless technology company, so we're developing the software for the vehicles, and we're actually partnering with all different kinds of vehicle manufacturers to put the technology into those vehicles. But our premier product is the Easy 10, which I'll talk more about. So here is the vehicle. So it's all driverless, all electric. For those technical folks, it's a level 4 automated vehicle. It can fit 12 people, 6 people seated, 6 people standing. It also has an automatically deploying wheelchair ramp so that people that do require mobility assistance can get in. And there is no need for additional infrastructure. The other thing I want to mention is that the speed of the vehicle, these are low-speed autonomous vehicles. The maximum speed is 25 miles an hour. They go on average something like 12 to 15 miles an hour. But as you'll see in a minute, there are actually quite a few use cases where that actually is very, very useful in our mobility needs. So in terms of safety, I will tell you this vehicle could not be safer. We've been operating over 100,000 miles around the world. We've never had a single accident. So we have all kinds of technology working together so that the vehicle always knows where it is to an accuracy of 5 centimeters. It knows where it's going, and it knows if there are any obstacles around. And it does that with all kinds of redundancies with these systems. So in terms of applications, literally we are finding that there are relevant use cases in urban, rural, suburban, and coast campuses. So just to throw out some examples, college campuses, airports, business parks, first and last mile to transit hubs, to business hubs. Really, think about that first and last mile gap. There are just tons and tons of opportunities. So here, this is an example of many, many places that we've been operating around the world. You can see we brand it differently. On the top left, we're actually operating in Singapore. We've been operating for over a year around Gardens by the Bay, which is a horticultural tourist destination. And the list goes on with different examples. I wanted to highlight a few projects in the United States that we're doing. One we just launched last month in Arlington, Texas. It's a city known for being the largest city in the United States with no public transit. They actually are just launched 2 vehicles that are currently bringing people from the sports stadium there to a parking lot. So it's a really short distance, but what's cool about what they're doing is they have a long-term vision to actually have transporting people from the university to a parking lot, and then ultimately doing a lot more with first and last mile transit. And that's what we find with a lot of our clients, is they're finding small use cases to start and introduce the technology, and then a longer term vision to actually fill a huge mobility gap in cities around the world. So what now? So this is where we really think about this merging of shared, electric, and autonomous. So in terms of policies, and this is going to be similar to what John just presented, I think it's so important that cities think through how do we get the behavior that we want to see out of this technology. So putting in roadway policies that actually can impact the vehicle miles traveled that we see. So think about cordon pricing, congestion pricing, vehicle miles traveled taxes. Adjust land use policies so that you do reduce urban sprawl. Get at either incentivizing good behavior or disincentivizing bad behavior. So if you want to discourage parking, then put up higher fees and taxes on the parking. If you want to discourage car ownership, increase the sales taxes on car ownership. If you want to see changes in zoning so that you have changes in parking minimums, these are all the kinds of policies. And then finally, change transit pricing. And this pains me. I've worked in transit for most of my career. Transit needs to stay competitive with all these other options. So as we've heard, transit is part of this mobility ecosystem, and for people to be willing to use it, you need to make it easy, and you need to make it competitive with all these other options, so that Uber, Lyft, and our shuttles and that kind of thing, they all fit into an ecosystem and they're not competing with each other. And then the last big thing is start a pilot. So this technology is here now. Our shuttles are operating around the world. And it's so important to build awareness about it. I'll just ask, how many of you have been in an autonomous vehicle? That is actually an impressive showing. That's probably like 10% of you. What we find is that the more people get into it, the more they learn to trust the technology and understand the potential in their lives. So build awareness, educate your stakeholders, establish partnerships. In the projects that we're doing, we're working with kind of in an unprecedented way. You're bringing together universities, insurance companies, private technology partners. So it's important to get them all together. Navigating the regulations is huge. I could probably write a book on where we're at today with the federal regulations at this point. There's a lot changing. Integrate with transit. Treat these vehicles as an opportunity to enhance your transit, not compete with it. Establish your insurance. Understand what the liability implications are going to be and how you can leverage the insurance companies. And then finally, inform your planning process. I don't know if any of you saw the statistic that National League of Cities found that over 95% of our cities in the country do not even mention the word autonomous in their long-range plans. These are plans that look out 30, 40, 50 years. So introducing a pilot today creates an opportunity to help understand and inform what your long-term plans are for mobility. So, do we have time for a video? How long? 2 minutes. Yes. All right. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video. This is in Arlington. It's actually when we were doing the demo. So it's just in a parking lot, but just so you can see the vehicle in action.
Arlington is the first local government in the United States to offer ongoing autonomous vehicle service to the general public.
Being the first at anything takes leadership and an eye to the future. And we're honored that the City of Arlington saw that in Easy Miles technology. This is a perfect location to deploy the driverless vehicles because you have so many people coming to this central hub of Arlington, especially people from all over the world.
To be able to give our fans the opportunity to experience this innovative technology and still give them the convenience to deliver them close to the ballpark or to AT&T Stadium is outstanding.
After operating over 100,000 miles all over the world in many different environments, these vehicles have never been in an accident. That creates a great mobility option for people, especially for people that are mobility challenged. Milo has an automatically deploying wheelchair ramp that can allow people with either strollers or wheelchairs to get on and off and be transported much more easily than they would have otherwise.
We are at the beginning of a technology revolution that is going to make our world better.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. So next up, we have Josh Sperling. Josh is from NREL as well. And like Alejandro, he has his PhD as well. Something that I think may be a first for all of us in this room tonight is that once we hear Josh speak, we're hearing from an urban futures and energy X nexus engineer. I don't know what that is, but we're about to find out. And he's also a multidisciplinary researcher. So with that, I think we're about to hear something very interesting, and I'm going to just give the mic to Josh and let him do his thing.
This is fun. It's a great group here, and thanks for having me tonight. I'm following a great group of panelists here. Many of them I've interacted with by phone and on panels, so I'll look forward to our group discussion here. So I'll keep it short, moving people forward, and that's my primary goal. And there's a quote, if we plan cities for cars and traffic, we'll get cars and traffic. If we plan cities for people and places, we'll likely get people and places. There's a song I also think of, if we had the Boulder music community, I think 5-10 years from now, we could flip that song on its head of unpaved parking lots and put up a paradise. Okay, so I'll touch on the nexus of mobility and energy. I look at the future of cities, the energy-X nexus. X is a variable. Energy is our entry point at the National Renewable Energy Lab. We're funded by the Department of Energy. I'll touch on some of those aspects. My colleague Stan couldn't join tonight, but he's in Columbus. He's our lead technologist in the city. They call him a TIC, who embeds himself within the city to bring the best of the National Laboratory's expertise to the Smart Columbus effort that was awarded $50 million from the DOT Smart City competition. The two of us lead the urban science activities. I'll talk about that as part of a larger smart mobility initiative at the lab, and that includes engaging with the 7 smart city finalists. So we're learning from each of these cities. We see Uber and Lyft there and many other vendors. So I'm going to start with where I came from. I did my undergrad at CU Boulder. In fact, Alejandro and I got to play soccer together back in the day. I coached soccer for the YMCA Boulder Valley throughout undergrad. But I actually come from another city, New York City. This is a picture of where I went to elementary school. We didn't have names, we had a number. Public school number 11. But what I want to share here about that experience is this is one of the few places in the US, Woodside, that actually has transit quite time competitive with actually taking a car to Midtown Manhattan. And so I think it's interesting to think about not just cost competitiveness, but people prioritize time. And I'll show some survey work we've done that talk about that. Okay, so energy. Transportation is a big part of the equation. We're seeing disruption in the transportation sector that's been described, and I think, Lauren, this is a slide borrowed from you. Which future are we trying to create? Scenario 1, scenario 2, there's probably a lot of options, but I think we want to guide this in a positive direction for both the public and private sectors. Okay, so my initial area of emphasis at the National Renewable Energy Lab, I came in during a period where we made an internal investment called it was a laboratory-directed R&D fund. It was the last year of 3 years. I was previously at NCAR in the Urban Futures program working on cities across the US, India, and China. How do we develop low-carbon, healthy, resilient cities? I came to NREL to try to create a cross-cutting team of people working in the urban space. We called it Urban X. X is that variable again. You can think about urban sustainability, urban innovation, urban resilience. And we came up with this graphic of how we could engage 5 areas. We think about connecting and convening communities. We hosted a workshop in each of the 7 DOT Smart City finalists to learn about where they're moving ahead with the local academic institutions, private sector. One hosted here at DU this summer. We try to integrate data and research. We try to inspire new thought leadership or action leadership. We work on co-designing pilots and change in our urban environments, try to implement small-scale solutions that might be scalable, and we try to validate and understand the insights gathered both in a quantitative and qualitative manner. This is the longer vision. I'll just say humans in the loop is a capability that we described as essentially moving NREL from what has traditionally been technology models out to 2050, 2080. It's much more focused on how do we improve quality of life for people today in cities. How is technology, new information, new services changing human behaviors, as well as how can we bring all of you as key stakeholders into the very early stages of our research and development activity to make it much more useful or usable to the folks we engage with, our audiences, rather than perhaps sitting on a shelf as multiple published papers. So the short version is we work on energy, we work on the services that they provide around the built environment. Alejandro and I were both in the same PhD program on sustainable urban infrastructure systems. And we try to engage a diverse group of stakeholders. We're interdisciplinary. I came out of a program with 25 PhD students, 6 from engineering, 6 from architecture and planning, 5 or so more from public policy, and then from the Department of Health and Behavioral Sciences. And so when you have all those different views and perspectives, it gives you a sort of humility that no one person or no one discipline has a silver bullet solution. We're going to need a combination and a suite of different approaches here. So we do research, we do trainings, we try to optimize solutions for people today, focus on improving quality of life first, and then trying to get additional benefits that could be energy savings, safety, increased mobility, and so on. This is a process in which I envision us engaging with cities, and it's only one framework. There's probably many others to do it. The top here is people. We focus on people first, that they're our goal. How do we improve their lives? Energy is our entry point as DOE. There's many characteristics of a system. DOE has talked about energy, modernization of our energy systems. And so you could ask a city of these 8 characteristics, which 3 are most important to you? Affordable energy, reliable system, and adaptable system. And you could do the same for transportation, or water, or buildings. What characteristics of your system or these services are most important? And if you're trying to tie energy, what I tell people is to connect it to people today and their lives. If our power went out today, our ability to treat water and wastewater, to store, refrigerate, distribute food, to move people and goods, to communicate, to manufacture, to have thermal comfort, to charge up our cell phones, all these services we rely on a daily basis would be affected. And so we're really focused on how do you sustain these services, ensure their reliability. You could think about environmental aspects. You could also collect data and understand what's the social, the economic, the new technology coming in, the new governance arrangements that might work more effectively. We were just in Denver this morning. We saw CDOT, Dr. Cog, RTD all coming together rather than separate transportation agencies thinking about the future with all these changes in technology. Could we see a joint plan? It's called the Mobility Choice Blueprint Initiative. So they're pooling their resources, and there's no reason for Boulder not to be a part of that. The right side is just, can we develop analyses that are specifically relevant to a product, a person, a household, a campus, a district, a whole city? There's different scales or temporal processes in which we can engage in. And then I think of, rather than a silver bullet, we're coming up with not just technology pathways, but ways to plan, policy pathways, behavior change pathways, and we have to pay for these changes in the system as well. So when we get to the end here, we ask decision makers, what are they thinking about? What are their questions? Can we start to collect data and do analyses that help answer their questions? While energy, city, and climate change might have been an emphasis for DOE in the last administration, this language is no longer part of our mantra. So we actually think about, we talk about energy efficiency, security, infrastructure, innovation, U.S. competitiveness in a global economy. And so it's another primary goal. You could think of decarbonization as a secondary goal, but not as much coming out in terms of being asked to tackle and analyze this. Okay, so our key program that Alejandro and I are working under, it's called the Energy Efficient Mobility Systems Program. This is the DOE Vehicle Technologies Office. Michael Barabee directs it. He shared that transportation's recently taken over as the biggest energy and emissions sector. Electric power and transportation are becoming increasingly integrated. We just talked with Will Torr this morning about a workshop he's going to be running next week on that topic. As DOE, it used to be very focused on components and vehicles. We're now moving towards more of a systems level focus. This includes various different initiatives. Smart Mobility is one. A low emission city was a key goal. Technologists in cities embedding our researchers directly in cities to help extend addressing some of the questions they're interested in. This is the 5 research thrusts that we're focused on. Each lab is leading one. There's 5 labs involved. NREL leads urban science. Alejandro's back very active in behavior decision science. There's connected automated vehicles led out of Argonne in Chicago, and these others, multimodal and advanced fueling infrastructure. This is one of the sort of bounding the utopia or nightmare that we've put some numbers to it. So this is for automated vehicles. You could see a future of a potential 60 to 90% decrease in energy all the way to a 200% increase. There's a lot of factors there of increased mobility for new populations to potential for sprawl. People choose, I want to live in the mountains, I have a newfound utility of my time, I can sleep, I can get work done, different activities. So we have this question of, for the first time in history, the Marchetti's constant, it's an Italian physicist who said, every city since ancient Rome, we haven't had the interest to travel more than 30 minutes or a total of an hour for a commute. This could, for the first time in history, potentially change as a result of automated vehicles. So something to think about. I'll skip through here. Globally, urbanization, this is another area for me that I'm passionate about after working in India and China. While our urban populations might double, our urban energy demands might triple. This is a result of sprawl as one factor. But essentially, we're seeing a lot of people wanting to come to cities. There's jobs, there's employment, education, livelihoods. At the same time, finding affordable housing is challenging. It's cheaper at the outskirts. And so it's a concern for Boulder, a concern for many cities around the world. This is Delhi versus Atlanta. You see the sort of concentration of density. This is Denver, and this red is all our parking lots, our parking facilities. There's a real opportunity to convert over or rethink how we go about the space in our cities. I think the Boulder environment's the same. I think the Wells Fargo lot, Pearl and Folsom, all the way to Pearl and 30th, there's a lot of surface level parking lots that could potentially go to affordable housing or other purposes. This is measuring energy use and emissions. This is a methodology developed at our UC Denver program. What you just saw there is the transboundary. So we often think about what's inside the boundary, scope 1 inside our city. This transboundary is regional commuters, air travel, freight. These are all energy and emissions that we often don't pay as much attention to or don't try to address as effectively. These are other transboundary activities. Every day we need to survive. We need the delivery of food, the delivery of water, transportation fuel, and a roof over our heads. That's a lot of cement production around us. And so when you consider all these things, this is a methodology that shaded area. We used to, as cities, only account for scope 1 and scope 2. Scope 3 was voluntary. We collected these 6 activities as transboundary. You're able to benchmark from a per capita level to a national per capita level much more effectively. It's allowing for a standardized process to measure emissions and aggregating up the achievements of cities to a national level or even global level understanding. These are cities around the world. We're seeing every decade 6 new megacities. I'll go back here. I've worked and lived in 7 of the 10 largest megacities. This is happening fast, but what I'll say is megacities, which are over 10 million in population, only make up 10% of the world's urban population. Most of the population in cities are in smaller mid-sized cities. That includes Boulder. Population is under 1 million. And so I think we have a lot to offer the global community if we can come up with innovative solutions and work with our global cities around the world. This is another way of looking at it. The demands for infrastructure, especially in the developing world, we're going to see a potential tripling of people who live in the developing world's urban population settings. I'll give an example of where I did some of my PhD work India, we saw a doubling of some smaller cities in 8 years, the motor vehicle population doubling every 4 years at current rates. This is a tremendous challenge for planning infrastructure in cities, and so I think while we talk about population growth here, there's really key leverage points if we want to address the energy and emissions equation around the world. Skip through here, this is another way to think about it. This is my uncle's book. He's at UC Davis. There's mention of 1.2 billion cars in the world. Within less than 10 years, we could potentially have 2 billion. And so that comes with challenges around energy, security, and how do we go about doing this in a way that maybe we don't move to a lot more private vehicle ownership, but new models. And so I think Uber and Lyft and others are trying to prove out these new concepts of a shared system or higher occupancy system. This is a Columbus slide. We have this lens of urban science, behavior and decision science. Mobility is the movement of people and goods from place to place, job to job, or social level to social level. Accessibility to jobs, accessibility to food is also key, something we think about. I'll just quickly say there's a race going on right now. Cities are in a race for attracting the best talent, for demonstrating the best ideas, services, products, and the research community is very active. And I just worked on a proposal with the German government, largest proposal I think I've ever written. It's $15–20 million. Multi-country collaborative research teams working across the U.S. and Germany to address an international climate initiative focused on cities. One was on sustainable urban development, the other on electric and shared mobility for Latin America. And so we're seeing a lot of interesting moves, not just from Uber and Lyft in our country. We're seeing Ola in India, Didi work in many cities and seeing tremendous growth. Didi invested in Brazilian market over $100 million in a local company called 99. And so this is, in Germany's coming up with their own program called Moya. So you're seeing all sorts of innovation in the mobility as a service space. And I think the US supporting our businesses and our ideas and the best of our approaches is going to help us to be competitive in a global market. Okay, I'm going to skip. This is just the 7 cities, 7 smart cities. What's happening in terms of transit and driving alone and carpooling. Trends are heading in not a good direction in a lot of these cities. You see the green as compared to the other cities, how they're doing. This is just population density, what it means for transit, how much it impacts San Francisco versus some of these other cities. The same goes for energy. This is our Boulder metro. We're seeing ridership increases. I surveyed on the A line and at the airport many different travelers, and these are the factors that come to mind when you're making a decision around the trip. Your convenience, your cost, time. So I don't think we can ignore these factors. Looking nationally at what's going down in terms of the percentage of total commuters driving alone, carpooling, or taking transit, maybe this is a space where we're starting to see an uptick in the transportation network companies. The example I give is San Francisco moved from around 4,000 taxi drivers to over 45,000 registered Uber and Lyft drivers in a very short period. That led to, within the city boundaries, you can now take an Uber pool or Lyft line for on average $3. It's very cost competitive with transit, and it's door to door. And so I think there's a fundamental rethinking in how do we be proactive here rather than reactive to the cities. I'm going to end just sharing one last slide. Safety. Vision Zero is an initiative. I know Boulder's very much into promoting a safe pedestrian and bicycling environment. This is a way of using data to look at where are we having traffic accidents in Denver. Can we make these locations safer? And when I think about behavior, when we're getting people into new behaviors and new modes, it has to be a positive experience for them. Positive reinforcement. If you think of a bike to work day and someone gets in an accident or there's some sort of issue, it may shape behaviors that are less conducive to a sustainable change in that behavior. So when we're considering new mobility choices, I think we have to make safety a key part of this, and I think of that with automated vehicles. So I'll stop there and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. So now I would like to invite all our speakers that were up here tonight to join us up here at the panel. We are asking all of you in the theater tonight, if you do have questions for these folks, to fill out some cards that you've been given on your way in. There is staff on the side of the rooms. If you could just raise your hands and wave so they know who to give their card to. They will collect those cards and bring them up to me. I'll ask the first few questions of our panelists here and get the conversation going. And then we'll start taking some of those questions as the staff folks group those questions. So all of you, thank you for your presentations tonight, all very impressive. First question, I will pose that to our researchers, Alejandro and Josh. The City of Boulder has some very ambitious goals. We've defined some of those in our comprehensive plan update. We'll be looking at them again in our transportation master plan update. And in your view, how can we be more ambitious? How can we get there faster? What are the technologies today that we should be thinking about over the next 5 years and trying to plan for with some kind of immediacy or ambitiousness that you think is implementable or that you're seeing being implemented in other cities? We don't like not being the first ones at something. We want to be as competitive and as ambitious and as progressive as we can. So we're interested in your perspective there. Josh, and then Alejandro.
Yeah, I'll start with a concept directly for Boulder that I've been thinking about and mentioned to Mike Sweeney briefly. We're working on a concept called automated mobility districts, coupled with net zero energy districts, where you're generating more energy than you're consuming. And so I think of actually the downtown Boulder core as a really good area to potentially expand east and west, maybe a block or two, and then south a block, north a block, where you actually make more of downtown Boulder a car-free area. You could have entrance into that zone if you're an automated vehicle that's not private, it's shared, it's higher occupancy, it's electric, it's right-sized, and you're demonstrating to the public and you're trying out in an environment where you're seeing a lot of people have the opportunity to become educated about this sort of concept. So I think the revolutions in technology are around shared, electric, automated. This is my uncle talks about the 3 revolutions. I think these are revolutions at different speeds, at different scales, but all very exciting.
I will add so Boulder has been a pioneer on, let's say, one of the first studies that I did in my grad school with the Active Community Transportation Research Group was to look at what Boulder did in a decade in terms of policy and eco-passes and how did that change the mode share of single occupancy vehicle to increasing transit, walking, and biking. So, and I know that takes a lot of effort, political will to do that kind of stuff. So in this scenario where we're talking about, I think that's where the policy come into place. And I know to provide a car-free area, I know that the whole community will be disrupted, and half of it, or 90% of them will say, well, you're crazy. But those are the kind of things that you have to do. And you can start with pilot projects. And these private companies know the market really well. As researchers, we can help you get there through data analytics, to travel behavior changes. And I think those are the kind of things that, let's say, maybe you start with a pilot where you see what changes are happening, where you can drive policy and make decisions that in the long term, you're getting at those goals or even better with those goals. And San Francisco did it before, we were actually meeting and overexceeding their goals, but also at the same time, they're worrying with what's going on now with these changes.
Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
So the list of policies that I recommended, which you saw from a bunch of us, what I realized when I put that together is that absolutely none of them are specific to the driverless technology. So adding a vehicle miles traveled tax, increasing sales tax on vehicle purchases, changing your zoning policies, nothing is specific to the technology. So in theory, they could all be implemented today. But a lot of them are not because they are so complicated, like you said. However, the introduction of the driverless technology creates an opportunity to introduce new policies because it all is all brand new. So it's actually creating because there is such high risk, there's impetus to do it, but it's creating the opportunity. So I think that's relevant.
One more thing I'll add along those lines is, before it actually comes into place, before we have the autonomous vehicles, if you introduce some of these policies, people will be more willing to accept that once it's in place and you start saying, well, we're going to start charging these, then it might be too late. And the same way I do the analogy with data collection. Let's say with Uber and Lyft, we miss this opportunity of putting the things in place. If you have to be sharing the data to do the analysis. Well, let's not miss that opportunity with autonomous vehicles. Let's have them in place that when from day one, with autonomous vehicles will be in place, we'll be collecting data so we can help cities meet those goals.
Thank you, Alejandro. The next question is for John, and then for Dave, and then the one after that will be for John. Dave, how does Uber and the services that you offer, the technologies that you're developing, how are those used in conjunction, in cooperation, or in collaboration with different cities, states that you're operating in? How do you work with local governments, state-level governments to help them meet their goals?
So I think there's lots of examples of pilots that we have across the nation. A lot of them have focused on the first mile, last mile, trying to help bridge the gap to get people to transit, to try and increase the transit use as well. Here in Colorado, we were part of the Door to Downtown pilot, which I think was a good example of all of us coming together to try and see if we could get businesses involved, to get everybody involved to try and help drive people to a specific zone. We actually have a pilot currently running down in the city of Lone Tree, where one of the things we're looking at is can we use our system to help increase the efficiency of the assets that they already have. So they run a circulator called the Lone Tree Link that we've actually done a link on demand where it's one of their vehicles that you can get through our application, and normally that vehicle would not be deployed. So I think a lot of it goes back to the idea of pilots and working with us in trying to figure out ways that we can work together to find the common goals. We've gotten better about sharing data. I understand we're not still as good as some people might like, but we do have, we are getting better about doing that. And I think that's a component of, as you look at the pilot, figuring out what is the data that's relevant in order to make sure that the city is achieving their goals by saying we want to have access to everything. I think that's the big opportunity right now.
Great. John, you showed us a slide that you said your CEO often talks to that's saying you're only 1% of the solution and that you have the ambitions to go even further. So what are the 3 top things that a city could do to support your services in a way that's able to let you get to your goals to provide more service and what you could do to serve?
So I think the idea of reallocating space for this emerging technology is really important. And so we can't continue to just assume everyone's going to drive and build, I think it was 8, somebody said 8 parking spots for every car, to incentivize people to drive their car into downtown Boulder. So what we need to do is start allocating space for the things we want. So we need HOV lanes, we need lanes that manage congestion, we need lanes that price the things we don't want and incentivize the things we do want. So what I'd love to see is, in the city of Boulder, I'd love to see pickup drop-off locations that are for mobility services like the 3 companies that are up here specifically for it. Instead of just parking for personal vehicles, I'd love to see managed lanes. I was just in Chicago and they took out a whole lane from downtown Chicago east to west that cuts across the city and made it an HOV lane. And it's amazing. I'd love to see something like that in Boulder. Because you better believe that everyone will take Lyft line. If you do that, you give people a direct shot. And so I think there's some interesting, simple things we can think about by just reallocating infrastructure for one.
Thank you. Something else that's really important in Boulder is the equity issue. We have a lot of different users, a lot of different riders, people with different means to access technology, people who may not have a cell phone or a smartphone or a credit card available, and those of all abilities, from different demographical ages to people that may have disabilities. Lauren, Easy Miles looks like something that has space for everybody. What can you do to address that equity issue? How do you provide greater equity to the users, and how would you do that in a place like Boulder?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a matter of putting the right options in the right place. So I'm the first to say that the Easy 10 is not the solution for absolutely everywhere to solve all of your mobility needs. And I think we heard that from Uber and Lyft too. It's really about the ecosystem. So understanding where the demand is so that you are providing equitable services around and making sure that you have right-sized vehicles and right-sized options in those places. So I think the Easy 10 is one piece of that puzzle. And so we have, like I mentioned, wheelchair accessible ramp. We can operate in a lot of different environments. So, for example, the example in Arlington, we're the first to say, and we were just in Arlington and they were saying, we're never, with these 12 capacity vehicles, 12-person vehicles, we're never going to meet the needs of all the people that are going from the parking lot to the stadium, but we are able to serve that population that maybe can't walk that whole distance. So it's serving a very specific need there, and I think we can find a lot of different options to do that with different types of vehicles.
Josh and then Dave.
Yeah, there was a meeting we had with CDOT recently where it was just a wild number thrown out of, we were talking about the future of their new headquarters, where they're moving closer to downtown where there's going to be more choices. They share 50% of their workforce in the next 3 years will be over the retirement age of 65. And so I think there's a real need to start planning now for the elderly, the mobility challenged populations. And by doing that, I think we're also going to more effectively meet the needs of the disabled. Paratransit's a very costly service right now for transit agencies. I think there's a lot of room for innovation in that space.
I think one thing I just wanted to flag, you mentioned the credit card issue. So around the globe, we have a lot of different places where cash is actually a major component of the business. And I was proud that Colorado Springs is actually the only city in the U.S. right now where we are piloting that to try and make sure that we can see a way to address that specific issue, because we know that if you're unbanked or if you don't have a credit card, it's a real big challenge. I think also the cash, and if it comes back to me, I'll ask you the mic.
All right, got it.
That's exactly what it was. Thank you so much. You are awesome. We also, and I know Lyft has a similar system where for people who don't have a smartphone, we have what we call Uber Central, which is a centralized dispatching system where you can have somebody order a ride on behalf of an individual. So as you're looking at somebody who might not have a smartphone or might not be comfortable with the technology, you can still leverage the system. So thank you for the huge save. I appreciate it.
So, Lauren, since you're holding the mic, let's just start with you on this question, and then we'll move to our audience questions. One of the biggest challenges that we see here every day is our 50,000 plus in commuters that are here on a daily basis. Also, Boulder has about 250,000 cars that make trips through Boulder on a daily basis. Can you talk more about the balance of what these services can do, where autonomous vehicles are going, but then the role of transit in all of this, and how that all works out?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll do this through examples. So we have a project in the Bay Area right now where we have 2 vehicles that are operating at Bishop Ranch, which is a private business park in the Bay Area. It's in the East Bay. And the intent right now is just to provide a service for employees that are going around this very large business park. So right now, the thinking is people are either taking BART, the transit system, getting to their office, and then they need to get around for either errands or lunch and that kind of thing. Over the next few years, though, there are plans to deploy 200 of our shared automated vehicles to provide the first last mile from the BART station to a lot of different places around that area. So what it's doing for right now, we're still having a lot of people drive to their job and then ideally get into our shuttle and just go around during the day. But if you think about what the impacts could be over time, you could actually see a lot more people taking transit because they no longer have to worry about that last mile, how they're going to get there, and they also don't need to worry about all the other things they're trying to do during the day. So it's really just about creating other options. I mean, I think that is the key, and that's what's so exciting about what technology is doing today. If you combine that with mobility as a service, where you're integrating fare payment across different modes, where you're sharing multimodal transportation information so people now have a better idea of the options. You combine all these things and people might actually say, this is more convenient and this is more cheaper than having my vehicle. So that's really what the end goal is.
Thank you.